Almost a year ago, Alex O'Connor moderated a now legendary conversation between Richard Dawkins and Jordan Peterson. And to the filthy casual, the most memorable moments were the bizarre discussions of the biological reality of dragons.
In literature,
I don't think the category of dragon is any less valid than the category of lion.
any less biological?
Well, it depends on your level of analysis.
However, I still cannot believe that so many people missed the profound point of agreement that occurred near the end of the discussion, one that has deep implications for both individuals and society.
Could you imagine a scenario where a meme had sufficient functional adaptive significance so that the individuals who acted it out gained a reproductive edge?
Yes.
Okay. So then you could imagine a situation where there was, I think I've got this right, a Baldwin effect between the meme and the genome.
Yes.
Okay. So then could you imagine an effect where the heroic hunters of the past who decided to cease acting like prey animals, maybe when they got rocks or sticks, were acting under the impulse that facing down the predator was the appropriate strategy? I would say that that's essentially the same pattern of archetype evolution that's implicit in the Jungian theoretical
Well, that's
model.
very interesting because that suggests that Jungian archetypes might be genetically assimilated via the Baldwin effect.
Yes,
Now, that's
yes.
a fascinating idea.
Yes.
For Richard Dawkins to express this level of openness and interest in one of Jordan Peterson's foundational philosophical ideas is at minimum a sign that we should examine this hypothesis further, given the potential bridge that it represents between science and religion. The Baldwin archetype hypothesis is a synthesis of two core concepts, the Baldwin effect and Jungian archetypes. Jungian archetypes are universal patterns of behavior that are grounded in our biology and acted out, as well as represented mythologically and symbolically in dreams, myths, and cultural artifacts like religion. For example, every human being that has ever existed was born from their mother, and so part of the human psyche contains the mother archetype. By the same token, the human psyche also contains universal and fundamental archetypes like predator, friend, or lover.
You're going to be manifesting archetypal patterns of behavior in your life, whether you know it or not. Even when you do something like fall in love, because that's going to be a very particular experience for you, but it's also a very common experience at the same time. And romance is older than people. That's one way of looking at it. I mean, because sex is older than human beings. And so you're in the grip of something that's really ancient. But at the same time, it's really personal.
Now, the Baldwin effect is an evolutionary theory that proposes that learned behaviors over many generations can eventually become innate through natural selection. Richard Dawkins explains the Baldwin effect using the example of British blue tits, the bird species, not Bonnie Blue.
It was suggested by Baldwin, I think in the late 19th century. It's a kind of genetic assimilation of a cultural or a learned idea. So the idea is that certain animals learn things, learn a clever trick. It might be nut cracking by chimpanzees, for example, or potato washing by Japanese macaques, or opening milk bottles by English tits. And it perhaps spread as mimetically as an epidemic of copying, and that's known to have happened with the blue tits and great tits in Britain. Now, certain individuals are likely to learn it faster than others, and there may be genetic variation in the speed with which they learn it. And as the generations go by, natural selection would have favored speed of learning the new trick. And eventually they would have learned the new trick so fast, they didn't need to learn it at all.
Right.
It becomes genetically assimilated into the genome. That's the Baldwin effect.
Okay, I would say that that's essentially the same pattern of archetype evolution that's implicit in the Jungian theoretical
Well, that's
model.
very interesting because that suggests that Jungian archetypes might be genetically assimilated via the Baldwin effect.
Yes.
The most important implication of the Baldwin archetype hypothesis, and where I think it bridges the gap between science and religion, is the degree to which it validates the claim that religions are not mind viruses, as many atheists would proclaim, but are instead compendiums of evolutionary wisdom. You can think of this approach to religion as the scientific reaffirmation of the principle behind Chesterton's fence. Instead of dismissing these seemingly irrational religious beliefs as Stone Age superstitions, they should be treated treated as adaptive until proven otherwise. For example, Richard Dawkins would point to the celibacy of Catholic priests as a clear example where a mind virus, Catholicism, undermines the genetic fitness of its practitioners. But if we look at things through a more adaptationist lens, we would see how a celibate clergy functions more like a non-reproductive caste within a population, like honeybees that don't reproduce themselves but benefit the hive.
Number 7, I really want to know your reaction to this one. I've been waiting all night. Catholics are eusocial. Does everybody in the audience understand what the claim is? That you have a non-reproductive caste within Catholicism, other religions too, but Catholics are kind to us in that they make everything so elaborate that we can...
Worker bees don't reproduce.
Right.
Priests theoretically don't.
Yeah, priests theoretically don't, and neither do nuns. Well, I think most of them probably don't. Don't you agree?
Yes. Yeah.
So, all right, the question is, you allege in The Selfish Gene that a celibate clergy is a failure of Darwinian selection. My claim here is that this isn't a failure, that this is adaptive celibacy, that it serves a lineage-level purpose. This is my claim, is that it is almost always going to be the case in any persistent religion that where you have people engaged in what appears to be some spectacular failure of Darwinism, that they just so happen to be spreading ideas that will result in the genes that are allowing them to fail as Darwinian entities to succeed by the lineage that holds those beliefs.
They devote all their energies to spreading Catholic memes, and they don't have to bother with the time and responsibilities of a family, so they're wholly devoted to spreading Catholic memes, including, incidentally, more than incidentally, the meme for celibacy.
Well, they spread the meme for celibacy, which my claim, if I'm right about this, then my point would be that Catholic lineages would actually do less well if everybody reproduced, that there is an advantage to having individuals who have stepped out of the reproductive market and therefore become capable of speaking on behalf of the lineage.
One way to conceptualize religion is by borrowing a concept that Richard Dawkins himself coined, called the extended phenotype. Genes express themselves in the bodies of living organisms as what we call phenotypes. But an extended phenotype is the expression of a gene beyond the body of the organism that contains that gene.
The evolution of an animal artifact like a nest has got to have come about through the natural selection of genes. Therefore, there must be genes for a phenotype which is not a part of the animal, which is made of grass or stone or mud or wood.
Religious traditions, as well as the cultural artifacts that result from those traditions, are not parasitic ideas directing humans towards self-destructive ends. On the contrary, the sacred spaces that every human society creates as part of their religion are the results of our genes expressing themselves in the same way that beaver genes cause them to create beaver dams that last hundreds of years, or termite genes cause them to create vast underground cities that last for thousands of years.
Beaver ponds are created by beavers to facilitate their own ecology, and they are passed down to next generation beavers, right? This piece of ecology is handed down, sometimes over the course of decades or even 100 years. These ponds, these alterations of the landscape, are handed down as an inheritance to future generations of beavers. And that, to me, looks very much like a lineage handing down a belief system that results in it being ecologically effective.
And while these traditions and artifacts are very complex, it's important to remember that they are ultimately elaborations that result from a basic evolutionary process in which a particular way of being, one that optimizes genetic fitness, is identified and represented.
We also know that your position in a dominance hierarchy, especially if you're male, is proportionate to your reproductive success. The higher you up in the hierarchy, the more likely you are to succeed. Okay, so what that means is that males have been selected for their ability to move up a dominance hierarchy. But that's not quite right. They've been selected for their ability to move up the set of all possible dominance hierarchies. And that's a very abstract set. And there's a set of characteristics that go along with the ability to move up the set of all possible dominance hierarchies that's represented in religious terms as the optimal ethical manner in which to conduct yourself.
Of course, underlying all of this is the monumental challenge of trying to figure out which religious traditions are more adaptive than others. Just because religion evolved doesn't mean all of its practices are good for individuals or society. For example, the extreme policing of sexual promiscuity is a common religious practice that may have given a population an advantage in an era where there was no birth control, no condoms, and no treatments for STDs that, like AIDS, could have wiped out an entire population if not contained. But given that we now have the technology to decouple the behavior from the risk, at least to some degree, that level of strict sexual repression is probably a greater cost than a benefit at this point. But ultimately, separating the wheat from the chaff when it comes to these religious traditions still requires the application of a sharp rationalist mind, albeit one that does not start with the presumption that the phenomenon being examined is a mind virus. So until next time, good luck and Godspeed.